Hello and welcome to Open School of Business. Today I'm excited to introduce you to Dan Edds. He's the leadership expert and someone who I'm particularly interested because he used to be a project manager for many years like me, and now he's running his own business, and he's a managing director at Praxis Solutions. Welcome, Dan, and please introduce yourself and what you would like to talk about today.
Sure. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. So, as you mentioned, my name is Dan Edds. I'm the founder and president of Praxis Solutions. The story of how I got into leadership, training, consulting, etc., really goes back to about 4 years ago, when I began to ask myself this question: how do high-performing organizations approach the practice of leadership? And that sounds simple enough, but it was what was the trigger was too many times in my consulting practice, I would come into an organization and they'd say, we want you to fix this or fix that, or fix that team, fix that group, help them with their process. We have these issues with cost recovery and revenues, and we don't want you to fix that too. And many times in the preparation for these engagements, I would ask a question like, okay, what is your unique competitive advantage? Or tell me about your staff, and tell me about the culture of your organization. And invariably people would say, the senior leaders would say things like, oh, our staffers they're fabulous. We have a wonderful staff. They are our most critical competitive advantage. And I said, okay, that's great. So then I would actually start working with their staff. And there is a massive disconnect between the way the senior leaders understood their employees and the employees themselves. Too many times I found employees who were discouraged. They felt underappreciated. They were exhausted. They would tell me things like, we've gone through this exercise before. I don't know that you're going to, provide us any better solutions than what we've had in the past. And of course I'd say, well, yeah, that was the past, but I'm different. And, we're going to fix this thing. And sometimes it got fixed, but sometimes you come back 6 months later, nothing has changed. One of the critical experiences that really got to me was I had just finished a project for a very large state agency. This agency regulated 450,000 healthcare providers. And by any measure, they were a mess. I mean, they were a total mess. Financially, they were a mess. Operationally, they were a mess. And so working with them for probably 8 or 9 months, we had a pretty solid roadmap on how to improve their operations. And it was going to take about 18 months to implement. But as I'm having my last conversation with the deputy director, I'm ready to walk out the door. I've got my coat on, I've got my computer bag in hand, my hand is on the door, I'm ready to leave. And she says, almost in a tone of confession, she says, I don't even tell my friends where I work anymore. I turned around and I said, why? She said, it's just too embarrassing. And I'd love to say that was an anomaly. That was the only time I ever heard anything like that. But the reality is, I heard that multiple times, multiple ways, not quite with that kind of impact. But that spurred me to start asking this question: well, how do high-performing organizations approach the practice of leadership? And then when I got looking at it, I found out that they approach leadership extremely different than traditional organizations.
What was your method on finding that out?
Great question. So there was a sort of a sub question that I was looking for, And that was, I was wondering, do they approach it in any way that looks like a system or systematic, or in a way that's systemic? In other words, they have a specific way that they do leadership. And which meant obviously that I had to figure out, well, what is a system? And I had to read every book I could find on systems thinking. And as a project manager, you recognize that there are various systems going on within an organization. Sometimes they're competing, and as the project manager, you have to mitigate, and you have to, deal with all of those sometimes competing systems. So that was the first thing I had to figure out was, well, what is a system? And then I had to figure out, well, what is it that I'm looking for? And what I really ended up doing was really looking at levels of employee engagement. I intentionally steered away from looking at financial returns as a measure of high performance, because not too many organizations are going to open up their financials to you. So it's just simpler and easier. And in the end, I really thought that looking at levels of employee engagement was a better way of looking at high performance, because you can't keep a workforce highly engaged for a long period of time just by pure inspiration and rhetoric. It's a different model. When people are coming to work, they're highly engaged with their organization, not for a year or two, but for 3, 4, 5, 8, 10, 15, 20 years or longer. That takes a different kind of leadership.
Right. So when you found this whole system on how to retain and engage your employees, was it somewhat unexpected, or do you think you saw that all along in the engagement you saw? And then what was the impact once you started applying?
Yeah, great questions. Excuse me. I didn't know I didn't know what I was going to find. I barely knew what I was looking for. I was really just thinking, okay, high performing organizations that perform at a high level for a long period of time. How do they do leadership? So when I started the project, I had just finished a project with a kind of a small healthcare organization. So I was looking in healthcare, and one, because you can get the data fairly easily. Much of the data in healthcare is public information, so it's not hard to get.
Mm-hmm.
And but I was curious about the whole idea of systemic leadership, and could leadership be understood as a system? And when I figured out what I was looking for, and that took me about 1.5 years, just what is a system, and how do I identify one? But then when I started to understand what a leadership system looked like, then I started seeing them all over the place. One of the more unusual leadership systems that I found, and actually I researched, was the New York Mafia. Not exactly the kind of results that most of us want, but they were highly effective for 50 years. They were incredibly effective. Oh, yeah. And when I got looking at their organization, they had a very well-defined system of leadership. And of course, if you decided to break ranks from that system, it was kind of deadly. So there was high degree of reason to follow the system. But I found the same thing in a number of healthcare organizations where they were performing at a very high level for a long period of time. They had very well-defined systems of leadership, to the point where they found it difficult to hire managers from outside the organization because they'd have to retrain them.
Yes.
Just one real simple example. It's one of the organizations I profile in the book. Right now, I think they've been recognized for, I think, 9 consecutive years as one of the safest hospitals in the country. Some have even speculated it's one of the safest hospitals in the world, which, may not sound like a big deal. You just automatically think that a hospital is a safe place. The reality is, I think the latest data says that there's 161,000 people that die every year due to avoidable accidents in hospitals, which makes
That's incredible statistic.
it is, and
Yeah.
it actually makes accidents in hospitals a leading cause of death in America. So safety is a big deal.
Right. And what hospital is that?
I'm sorry?
What hospital is that?
It's called Virginia Mason Medical Center. It actually happens to be here in Seattle. I wasn't looking for it. One day I was just looking at data on hospital safety, and these data they're published every year. So I went back a year and there's Virginia Mason Medical Center. Interesting. I knew it was a common name, and so then I went back to the next year. Going backwards. Virginia Mason Medical Center. And so I'm going back, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 years. Okay, now I'm thinking they're doing something special, really unique, and they're doing it for a long period of time. So I reached out to them and had the wonderful opportunity to spend a half a day with one of their senior leaders. And she took me through the whole, they have a main hospital in downtown Seattle, took me through the whole hospital, had a chance to sit in on what they call a Friday afternoon report out, where the various teams that are working on process improvement initiatives come into one place, big auditorium, video streaming, and they explain what they did in their project and what worked and what didn't work, and what they would do differently next time, and how they hope to improve their systems and their processes.
So they work not only on improving the process, but also improving, disseminating the information about it and working on their mistakes every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting things that I saw about them and every other organization that I found that was really performing at a very high level is that you can back up. So every organization, and it doesn't matter if it's the 10-year-old girl that's selling lemonade at the local park on a Sunday afternoon, or if it's the United States Army with 2 million active and reserve duty, personnel. Every high-performing organization that I found looks at people, money, and information differently. They see those 3, let's call them resources, as a resource that they can, if they manage them correctly, they can increase the value of those resources continuously. Average organization sees those resources as assets that have to be managed. And it's the difference is nuanced. But if you take people, for example, people can either be managed, which is a nice way of saying, well, controlled, or they can be viewed as a resource. But as a resource, that means I want the value of that resource to grow over time. So this hospital that I referenced, when I was speaking with them, what I discovered, and actually when I saw it, I was stunned. It was, I mean, I've been into a lot of organizations and worked with hundreds of organizations. When I saw what they were doing to develop the resource of their people, I was so shocked that I actually made an appointment to talk with a woman at Harvard University who had been kind of, I refer to her as sort of a coach and mentor, although I'm not sure she has any idea that she's done that. Woman by the name of Dr. Barbara Kellerman, one of the world's leading experts on organizational leadership. I got her on the phone. I said, "This is what I saw. Can you explain it to me?" I said, "I've never seen anything like this." She knew exactly what I was talking about. referenced a new book that had been published by Harvard called An Everyone Culture. Highly recommend it. But this healthcare organization had come to the conclusion that people represented a resource that if they could develop that resource and the full capacity of that resource, not just making doctors better doctors and nurses better nurses and med techs better med techs, but if they could help create a better human being, one who is more self-confident, one who has felt more self-empowered, that had a direct value, direct impact on their desire to create a safe hospital. And it's really pretty simple when you think about it. If someone sees a problem, they're in the OR and they see a potential error, who is more likely to speak up? Someone who's self-confident or someone who is insecure? I think simple logic would say someone who is self-confident is the one who's going to speak up. So they made this connection between self-confident employees and workplace safety, and it works. And they train every leader specifically how to develop a more self-confident workforce.
Yes, empowering leaders, empowering other leaders, and empowering other leaders.
Right.
And also having that environment where if you're the messenger of bad news, you're not getting shot, you're getting rewarded for that.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah, precisely.
I think in a lot of corporations, people who are, pointing out to issues, trying to see all the risks, they're labeled as whiners sometimes, and people try to shy away from being labeled such ways, and don't want to even talk about the problems because they need to report high performing results. They need to say, yeah, we're good, we're on schedule, we're on budget, and people like nudging numbers and things like that. I'm making it look all great, especially if there is a disconnect between senior management and the leadership and the people who are actually exhausted and working nonstop and seeing all these problems. But when they speak about it, they get punished instead of rewarded.
Right.
So it does definitely show that culture of where if you're actually someone pointing out for the problems, you're a good person because then we know what is the problem and we can work together on solving them.
Right.
And it's just such a great example, but I can't help but I'm just curious about the whole New York mafia thing. Like, where are the similarities?
Well,
between this great safe hospital and the way they're empowering their employees to be self-confident and discover issues versus
well, it really comes down to the structure of a system. So as you probably know, anytime you're designing a system, and it doesn't really matter if it's a digital system, if it's a healthcare delivery system, or if it's a system of engaging employees or customers, the first step is to identify, well, what's the purpose of the system? What is the system supposed to produce? So this hospital determined that it was going to operate off of a single value of respect. Respect for the work, respect for the patient, and respect for the worker. And so if you're a leader or a manager in that organization, you know exactly what you are supposed to do. One of your primary tasks is to produce a culture based on respect. And so you treat patients with respect, you treat workers with respect, and you treat the work itself with respect. So a real simple example of how they how they operate. The main hospital is about a 10-story building, and it's built into a hill. And from the top floor, probably the top 2 or 3 floors, there's an expansive view of downtown Seattle. You've got Puget Sound, a harbor below that. You've got snow-capped mountains to the east. To the south, you have Mount Rainier, 14,000 foot, snow-capped volcano. It's a beautiful sight. Based on a value of respect, where do you think the executive offices might be located?
No, it should be somewhere down, I think. The basement or something
Exactly.
is the opposite of what a lot of corporations would do.
Exactly. They are in the basement, precisely. Because based on a value of respect for the patients get the view, not the executive leadership. Also, based on a value of valuing money and what money can produce. An executive office suite is a very low value piece of real estate. It's expensive if you put it up on the top floor.
Right.
But the best work of leadership is not done with people sitting in their offices. Leaders do their best work when they're out with their employees, with their teams, working with them one-on-one, not when they're sitting in an office.
Right.
So they put the executive offices in the basement intentionally because of that. So the connection to the mafia is what I discovered in looking at them was they too had a purpose, an output of their organization, which was to protect the family. Everything was designed to protect the family. And if you chose not to protect the family, you would probably be killed. Now, it was a very different kind of operation, obviously. But they started from the foundation of protecting the family, and they had a whole series of rules, routines, identified behaviors, and it was things that most of us would find disgusting, but they had certain rules, like because they were all men, there were rules about women that you could play around with. You could not. The rule says you can't mess around with the wife of another family member. All other women, though, fair game. Now, obviously, that kind of thing makes most of us disgusted, but it was a rule that reinforced their value of protecting the family at all costs.
Right. And the wives of them, of the gang members would also feel like they're valued in
Exactly.
that sort of situation, and they
Right.
feel as a part of the family, therefore they're less encouraged in doing the legal thing and turning
Exactly.
them over.
In a perverse way, they were performing exactly the way their system expected them to perform. And so when you think about a hospital, they start out with this core purpose of respect. And I found the exact same thing in organizations as small as an elementary school. This school had gone from the lowest performing elementary school in a district of 25,000 students and 18 different elementary schools. In 5 years, they're performing at the highest level elementary school in 5 years, which means higher academic achievement in their case for a rather diverse blend, ethnic and economic diverse blend of students. And when that wasn't good enough, they actually brought it up and took it up another notch and became one of the few schools in the nation to actually close the achievement gap, which is the academic gap between rich and poor, minority and majority, et cetera. Not too many schools do that. They did it. They're doing it right now. And huge accomplishment. When I asked the principal, I said, so this is the question I asked everybody. There is 1 or 2 words that described your approach to leadership, what would they be? And she immediately said, well, this won't be very popular, but love and grace. And I thought, oh, how cute. These 450 little kids, they have a principal who loves them. I thought, nice. And she read my mind. She said, that's not the way I'm thinking about that. She said, I use those words because they remind me that I could have a difficult conversation with a team member before it blows up, but do it in a spirit of love and grace. And then she starts talking to me about collaboration. And what I realized is that the analogy that I use in the book is that a system is like a DNA molecule. And you've seen the classic example of a DNA molecule. It has the structure of the double helix. And when she was talking to me about love and grace and collaboration, those were her double helix, the two sides of her organizational DNA. Love and grace was the pathway to a culture of collaboration. And that collaboration, by setting it up that way, it actually moved beyond just the walls of the school. It actually moved into community groups where they realized, well, collaboration is good for us as an institution. Well, maybe that also means we should be collaborating with other neighborhood groups and community groups. And maybe it means we should improve the collaboration with the families of our students.
Yeah.
And so if you go to that school today, there is a once a month movie night that the PTSA invites families to watch a family movie at school, which doesn't sound like a very big deal until you realize that the families living in this neighborhood are intimidated by education. Usually their own lack of education makes them a little intimidated and fearful about speaking with a teacher or going to the school. It's a place they don't feel safe and welcomed. But by having a movie night, the school becomes a community asset. And if you go to that school a week before school is to start in September, you'll find 50 to 75 volunteers working at that school all day Saturday. They're pressure washing sidewalks. They're cleaning rooms where medically fragile children will be spending their days. They're cleaning them. And they will be working with teachers, helping them get their rooms ready for school in a week. 4 or 5 adults can do as much as a single teacher can do in a week. And so, that frees a whole week of work up for the teacher, which means that he or she can now spend more time preparing for students as opposed to, preparing a classroom.
Yes. Education is by far one of my favorite topics. And once you were talking about this elementary school, I couldn't help but remember mine. And we always did spend all the holidays there with the parents and the teachers. The whole culture back in Kazakhstan is that even prom, we celebrated with our parents.
Okay.
No one gets a date. Everyone just comes in the way they came in elementary school with their parents, and we
Yeah.
spend the night eating, dancing together, and all
Right.
that stuff. So it is really great about the whole, the love and grace and respect. I picked up those 3 aspects, and it reminded me about communication management, because if you're trying to talk to a person, whether about improving their behavior or about some new changes that are coming along, if you're talking to them without opening them up first, you're talking to a wall pretty
Right.
much. There is no the communication is not happening. There's nothing to manage at that point.
Right.
So first of all, the first step is opening up the person, building the relationship where you're able to talk to them
Right.
about anything that difficult or not so difficult, but still the bridge needs to be there.
Yep.
And it seems like all these high performing organizations are about building that bridge where information flows freely,
Yep.
and people listen to each other because they love each other, they
Right.
respect each other.
Right.
And it's just so great.
Well, you just used a word that I'm uncomfortable using in the context of business, and that's love. It just makes me a little uncomfortable. And yet, Erin, this principal, she said yes, quite without apology. Um, I want my team to experience love and grace. Now, the interesting thing about that conversation was that just a few, probably a month or two before I had this conversation with this elementary school principal, I happened to have the opportunity to interview a retired 4-star general of the U.S. Army, General McCaffrey. When he retired after 32 years, some speculated he was the most highly decorated general to have ever worn the uniform. He certified war hero. He has 3 Purple Hearts for wounds in combat. He's led men into combat. When he retired from the Army, he went on to serve as a cabinet member in the Clinton administration. So he knows if there's anything about leadership he doesn't know about, it's not worth knowing. And when I asked him the same question I asked everybody, which is, if there's 1 or 2 words that you would use to describe the Army's approach to leadership, what would they be? And he immediately said, we practice servant leadership. And it still kind of gets me choked up, but his next breath, he's talking to me about love. And frankly, I was so focused on the interview and, making sure I got my questions, in appropriate spot, make sure I didn't, look stupid in front of this guy who's really a national treasure and resource, that I didn't even hear him say it until I was reading the transcript afterwards. And he was talking to me after he's saying servant leadership. He starts talking to me about his commanding officer in the first Gulf War. So we're talking about 1991. Guy by the name of General Norman Schwarzkopf. And General McCaffrey was telling me, he said, I was just one of his divisional commanders, like small time. Well, he's the commander of his command is 26,000 soldiers, 4,600 vehicles, 100 aircraft. He could wage war on a major scale almost any place in the world. And yet he says, my senior officer, General Norman Schwarzkopf, he said he loved soldiers. And his words were, it wasn't just a thing. He said he actually loved soldiers. And his words was, he said, I was just one of his divisional commanders, but he actually loved me. And when I read that, I was really stunned at hearing a guy who has been a leader in the most extreme environment talking about love. But then when I got looking at it further, he wasn't talking about a warm, gushy, sentimental, emotional love. He was talking about love as a verb, love in action. So the Army has, people don't realize it, but the Army really is a value-driven organization. One of their core values is selfless service. And it's not just a, words on a poster for the wall. They take it extremely seriously, and they define selfless service as putting the welfare of the nation, the Army, and your subordinates above your own. So when General McCaffrey was explaining that to me, I said, so how does the Army support, train, and reinforce the practice of servant leadership? And he immediately said there's 3 ways. He said there's more, but three simple ways. One is when a team is going off on a mission and they're loading into the helicopter, who do you think is the last person to get on that helicopter? I'll answer the question for you. It's the highest performing, it's the highest ranking officer. Now, they're not just being polite. They're boarding that helicopter last for a very specific reason. When they land at where they're heading, and if it's a hot landing zone, which means bullets are flying, who is the first one to get off that helicopter, symbolically putting themselves in harm's way first? It's the highest ranking officer, because they operate on this value of selfless service. So if you're in that helicopter and you're the highest ranking officer, your job is to put the welfare of everybody else above your own welfare. And that means putting yourself in harm's way first. And when you're leaving that landing zone or leaving to go on the mission, symbolically, you are the last one to be in a position of risk.
Right.
And another simple way was you've got soldiers eating breakfast or lunch or dinner, and they're going through it to cafeteria. Who goes through the cafeteria line last?
The highest ranking officer.
It's the highest. Yeah. It's the highest ranking officer. It's not just because of being polite. It's because it supports the practice of servant leadership and putting the welfare of your subordinates above your own. So if food runs out, the subordinates get the food, the officers don't. So how do you think, what would be the culture like in our organizations of any size if every leader and manager was trained, mentored, and coached to put the welfare of, let's say, their customers and the company and their subordinates above their own welfare? We would radically transform our organizations, and I think produce more innovation, more customer value, and people would be lining up at the door to do business with you. Actually, one of the manufacturing companies I profile in the book is organizations that does that, and they literally have customers waiting in line to do business with them.
Right. And it's a very challenging topic, but I'd like to bring it up since you were talking about putting literally other people's lives ahead of you. And in corporations, you would do the same, but how would that manifest? For example, I can say like salaries or bonuses. Even in Army, I'm sure highest ranking officers would make more money too.
Yeah.
So
was it
how does that integrate with the system?
Yeah, great question. As it turns out, engagement levels of employees has nothing to do with salary, benefits, and bonuses. Competitive salary gets somebody in the door, doesn't keep them there. The latest research from Gallup says that millennials, they will actually take a pay decrease back to the first generation to say, I'll take less money if I could work in an organization with a positive culture that will develop my full potential and value. First generation to do that. So we think that money buys long-term engagement, and it doesn't. Engagement is really driven off of the culture and the everyday experience of the employee. So when Aaron, the elementary school principal, talked to me about love and grace as a pathway to collaboration, the experience of that team, 75 teachers, custodians, The school nurse, assistant principal, counselors, et cetera, they all they had the daily experience of a collaborative culture based on love and grace. And the hospital that I referenced of Respect, you work for that hospital, you could expect to experience respect. One interesting story was a nurse who was getting ready to administer chemotherapy to a patient, and she noticed that 2 tests that the protocol said should have been administered already were not. So she called the attending physician, said, I'm getting ready to give this patient his chemotherapy, but these 2 tests haven't been done, and what should I do? And the doctor overrode the protocol and said, go ahead and do it anyway. Well, because she had been trained to put the safety of the patient first, based on respect for the patient, she felt like her highest duty was to the patient and not making her attending physician happy. Right. So she called the chief of oncology services and said, what do you think I should do? Who then called her attending physician and said those 2 tests need to be administered. The attending physician, recognizing that the nurse had just embarrassed him, went and verbally abused the nurse. When the chief of oncology services heard about it, he took that attending physician offline and did a formal investigation because he violated the genetic code of respect. And so it's that daily experience. And what I discovered was that people will almost volunteer their time to have a daily experience that's positive, that's respectful, that's where they work, when they can work in an atmosphere where their voice is valued and heard. They will not only take a pay decrease, but they want to work in those kinds of cultures, and they will give of their time sacrificially to work in a culture where they are valued and respected. And too many of our large organizations, especially, but all across the spectrum, when you see people as an asset that has to be managed, they're a widget. They're putting round holes and round pegs and round holes. But when you see them as a resource, then what do you want to, any resource that you own, you always want to see that resource increase in value. And that's their approach with people. And the result is that they get more value out of their money. This hospital that I referenced during the 2007, 8, 9 recession, not only did they not have to lay off anybody, they continued to pay bonuses to the people who qualified for bonuses. And the other side, the other output of that is innovation. When you have people who feel every day that they are valued and respected, they're far more likely to innovate. The manufacturing company that I just referenced, 200 employees. On average, every employee generates 5 to 6 process improvement initiatives on their own. Each one saves the company about $1,000. That equates out to every year, the company is pulling out of its cost structure the equivalent of 4 to 5% of gross sales, not expenses, but gross sales. Yes. Which gives them enormous flexibility. They could take that cost savings, they could pass it on to customers, they could pass it on to their employees for higher bonuses, higher wages. They could pass it out to the shareholders, of which there's only one, he's the owner. So it gives them enormous leverage of how they integrate, how they interface with their customers. One of the reasons why they have customers lining up at the door is because there's so much, they deliver so much value to their customers. Customers see it and say, we get higher quality products at less cost. Where's the math in that? That's not a difficult decision. Well, you better get in line because there's lots of people wanting to do business with them.
Yes, and then the more volume you get, the more profit. So at the end, everybody wins. You get
Everybody wins.
bonuses for employees, you get
Yep.
shares for shareholders, and
Right.
their dividends.
Right.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Um,
But they take the traditional power dynamic of leader and employee, and they flip it. So in the manufacturing company, they too, when I talked to them, they said, well, we practice servant leadership. And I thought that's exactly what I saw, even to the point of what they've changed the titles. So they've changed the traditional title of production lead and production manager, and production coordinator or project manager, or whatever. They're all mentors. So if I'm working for you and you're my production lead or my manager, I don't think of you as my manager. I think of you as my mentor. And your job is to be my mentor. That's part of your function. And so if I see an opportunity to improve the process that I'm working on, your job is to mentor me in how to go through a formal Kaizen process to determine whether or not my idea is worthwhile. And even if it's not, by the way, I'm going to be rewarded for it. I'm going to get paid time off.
right.
Because I saw an opportunity to improve. It may not have worked, but I saw the opportunity and I took it. And you as my boss, I refer to you as my mentor, and you understand that your role is to mentor me.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, if I want to learn how to do this other job over here that looks more interesting, your job as my mentor is to facilitate me learning that other job.
Yeah.
So that takes the traditional power dynamic of leader and follower and it flips it. And when you see it, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I think even when I mentor entrepreneurs in my practice, I always say the more people in your organization, like as you scale, you have to treat them as equal, because as an entrepreneur, every new mind that enters your organization, they can create something that will be of immense value.
Yep. Yep.
Even could be much better idea than your initial idea. So even your interns, you have to treat them and hear out all their ideas,
Yep.
and let them do their creative things
Yep.
to enhance the collaboration.
Yep.
Because if you're the one coming up with ideas and giving orders and giving out tasks, making the plans, and
Mm-hmm.
being a standard manager,
Mm-hmm.
then you will grow only within your potential. But if you give the people
Absolutely.
the power to do things that they think is relevant, then you can take advantage of all this creative power of 10 people, 20 people, of however
Yep.
many you have in your organization.
Right. Right.
So I think that is the biggest mistake managers make when they think these people are just the tools and instruments on getting your vision done.
Yep.
Whereas these are human beings, and even, AI, even
Mm-hmm.
though how advanced we are right now,
Mm-hmm.
still at such an infancy level.
Yep.
And every person is unique. Therefore, all people's ideas and all their efforts could be
Mm-hmm.
so important. Like, even
Yep.
in entrepreneurship is definitely, because
Yep.
everyone has their own niche and their own
Right.
things that are working on. But
Right.
even in a highly regulated
Mm-hmm.
healthcare
Mm-hmm.
um, sphere, is still the self initiative and being able to question things and
Yep.
not do things just as in protocol or as in what your boss is saying
Well,
is critical.
you're as we say, you're hitting the nail on the head and you're explaining it perfectly. And one of the things that I challenge people about is when you treat people as a resource, and you can capture that innate ability to create, to innovate, to transform, to problem solve, and you can capture that additional value in your people, what does it cost? Nothing.
Yeah.
It's absolutely nothing, because it walks in the door every day. And if you're paying someone to put, a round peg in a round hole, that additional value that they bring with them doesn't cost you a penny more. It only means that you have to behave as a leader or manager. You have to behave in a little different way. And to scale that, to scale that idea from, let's say it's a new startup company of 10 people, to scale that to a company of 1,000 people or 10,000 people or 50,000 people, you can't do that by talking to leaders one at a time. You can't bring in, if you have a company of 10,000 employees and you have 1,000 leaders, you can't scale that kind of behavior, that kind of culture, by talking to leaders one at a time, giving them some kind of a lecture-based course. It doesn't work. You actually have to have a system of leadership, a specific way of leading, so that every leader knows that they're leading to a specific end. And that's what the Army has done. They start teaching servant leadership from the first day of boot camp. And when I brought up the subject of training with the general, he said that when he became a 1-star general, the Army required him to go to a 9-month school and how to execute the requirements of a 1-star general. Not a little simple lecture-based, online course.
Yeah.
9-month school. When he became a 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, each additional star required another 9-month school. And I'm thinking, who teaches a 4-star general how to be a 4-star general? That's as high as you go. But the Army teaches, coaches, trains, and mentors in servant leadership starting from the first day of boot camp. And the high performing organizations that, I mentioned this hospital, they don't hire too many managers from outside the organization, because they literally have to retrain them.
Yeah. And also, if you think about it, their value is respect. Therefore, having their own people being promoted makes more sense.
Absolutely. I mean,
So,
just one simple thing that they do that really kind of blew me away. The traditional model of leadership says, I'm the problem solver. And most leaders get promoted because of their ability to solve problems. In this hospital, you are actually trained and coached not to be a problem solver. So if I'm working for you and I'm having this problem, and I come to you and say, I need help with this problem, your job is to not solve it for me, because that would be disrespectful of my place in the organization as the frontline worker who is the most qualified to understand and solve the problem. Your job is to coach me, maybe mentor me. You could help me think about the problem, frame the problem, understand who the other processes and people and organizations and divisions within the organization that may be impacted by my solution, but you're not to solve it for me. And the other thing is that if I was to come to you, let's say I walk into your office and I say, I've got this problem, that would be an indication that you as my manager, you're not doing your job, because your job is not to be sitting in your office. Your job, and even if I said I have a problem, your job is to get out of your chair and you come to my workstation and speak with me and listen to me or my team. When I asked my tour guide, I said, so what about the the open door policy, she says, we don't believe in them. She said, to this extent, if an open door policy is required, it means that the manager or the leader is not doing their job, because their job is to be working one-on-one with their team. And if someone has a problem, their job is to go to that worker at their workstation.
Because
And
most likely the problem is involved somewhere there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome. So about your own company, how many people do you have, and what are the dynamics there? What are the things that are most pressing, and how do you deal with them?
Well, the company is basically just me, and when I'm doing engagements, I bring other associates on, kind of where they fit. It's a very traditional model of a consultancy. So, when I need various people, I bring them in. I'm actually completely transitioning the company right now. For years, I've been doing basic process improvement, organizational improvement work, done a lot of lean engagements. And I'm actually transitioning the whole thing right now to working with organizations and helping them build their cultures. And that happens because you build a culture through your leadership. And you have to build a culture through a designed system of leadership, which is what I found in doing the research. So I'm transitioning everything that I'm doing right now. So it's kind of scary. And I'm, many ways, I'm going after a whole new, different client base. So I'm doing things like podcasts and doing things on LinkedIn, and every place I could find someone who will give me a chance to talk about it. But my passion really is when you see cultures, organizational cultures, where people are respected, they're valued, their voice is heard. It's not a moral argument. There's lots of people that talk, well, it's moral to treat people with respect. Yeah, that's true. But the reality is it's also an economic argument, that when you, as you just pointed out, when you can capture that innate intrinsic value of people, for problem solving, for creativity, for innovation, when you can capture that and bring it into the organization, you exponentially multiply the value you're delivering to your customers. And I saw it enough in my research that I thought, I want to spend the rest of my life doing this.
Yeah.
Because
and I think it's the right time, because in Deming's time, the manufacturing was booming. So therefore, process improvement, Kaizen, and lean practices were very much in demand. And it seems like in our age of information, and where people are engaged in a very independent way with their work, this is a more popular topic, I would say, and definitely more invasive and more impactful, therefore. Because a lot of companies, they already have their processes, and I don't know if that's the case, because you've done process improvement. Have you seen the demand for those type of engagements decrease over time, because they've already done a lot of work in that regard, you think?
You are incredibly insightful, and you are your question and your insight is spot on.
Thank you.
So yes, Deming worked primarily in the manufacturing industry, if you will. Started out in Japan, obviously, and then came over here. And most of the reason why half of us drive Japanese cars are because of Deming. And but I have a hope that Deming, the whole concept of Deming, or his approach, is I hope there's going to be a resurgence of Deming, because you're absolutely right. Manufacturing process improvement in manufacturing is really pretty easy because you could see widgets go through the assembly line, and you could see, raw materials get turned into new mousetraps. You don't see that in an information age. What's the raw materials of a company that's in the information sector? Well, it's all in here. And so, one of the things that Deming said, and I used to be a fan of Deming. Well, now I'm a stark raving lunatic fan of Deming because his principles have just as much value today as they did, 25 years ago or 30 years ago or 50 years ago. Deming said that the system will produce exactly what it's designed to produce. Not an exact quote.
But yeah.
So you think about leadership, and why do so many of our organizations, even organizations that make a lot of money, why do they have, high turnover? Is it just stress? I don't think so. I think they have high turnover because they have lousy cultures. They may make a ton of money, but what more could they be doing if they created cultures of collaboration with their employees, cultures of respect? They would, and you can't do that without intentionality and without a system. And so when Deming says that the system will produce what it's designed to produce, if the system produces chaos, if the system produces high employee turnover, it's doing exactly what it was designed to do. Maybe not intentionally, but it's doing what it was designed to do. So as Deming points out, you can change the system. The other thing Deming points out, I think he says that was it 96% of all problems or maybe it's like 92% of all problems are the result of the system.
Yeah.
So change the system. And in this country especially, but around the world too, leadership is understood as me. It's understood as you. It's your personal leadership. It's my personal leadership and my personal leadership style. Well, Deming says that's the problem right there. If you design the system so every leader is leading according to certain values and behaviors, and they're modeling those behaviors, now you have the opportunity to scale core values, to scale respect, to scale the way you develop your people, the way you innovate. You can scale that, again, from a team of 10 to a team of 10,000. But you have to have a system to do that.
It's incredible. I love that because when you were saying that, I just immediately thought about Steve Jobs' leadership at Apple.
Mm-hmm.
And when it ended, it had devastating effects on the company. And had they had a system in place instead of relying on just one iconic person,
Mm-hmm.
would have been much better. And I think they're recovering really well. Still, yep. Apple products are just amazing.
Yep.
And I'm just really glad that your experience from the process improvement and lean part has joined forces with the leadership, and you're actually providing the systemic value on
Mm-hmm.
leadership and how to have impactful engagement on the company, your clients. So thank you so much for your conversation today, for sharing your great insights, your experiments and the examples from the book. I encourage everyone to check out the book on Amazon. We'll have some links on it.
Yep.
And good luck in your work. We wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, if any of your listeners, I have several free resources. One of which is an article on, actually there's several, but the one is on how to engage the employees. It's the 4 strategies on how to engage employees and create that high engagement culture. And they just go to my resource page and it's available free for downloading.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that.
Okay. Thank you. And, pleasure to be with you.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.